and returned in 1998 and has been really part of the government, in particular part of the Kurdistan Democratic Party throughout his time since then, been elected to that government and as part of its leadership council. I don't want to say too much more in introduction, but obviously as the person who led for 7 years before becoming Prime Minister the Kurdistan region's security, intelligence, military intelligence, he played an absolutely pivotal role in the defeat of ISIS after it rose and took over up to 40% of Iraq, if I remember rightly, in that 2014-15 period. And therefore, somebody who's really been at the pointy end of the conflicts in the region, but somebody who is deeply knowledgeable about the region more broadly and about geopolitics, as you are at the crossroads of so many historical but also very current geopolitical tensions. This meeting is on the record. I'm going to invite Prime Minister Barzani to say a few words here from the podium, and then we'll take some questions and really look forward to engaging all of you with any of your questions. We've got an hour, which will take us up to 11 o'clock here. But again, welcome, Prime Minister. Delighted to welcome you to Chatham House, and we look forward very much to your remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to be here speaking from the floor of one of Britain's foremost institutions. For over a century, Chatham House has informed the foreign policy of the UK and influenced greater understanding far beyond its borders. It has brought insight and authority of some of the most complex challenges of our time and provided a vital platform where global ideas have been tabled and debated, often for the greater good of the world. I embrace the opportunity to address you today to discuss events in our region, the Kurdistan region of Iraq and the Middle East, a part of the world that I know has consumed a lot of your bandwidth in recent decades, as I can assure you it has mine as well. With war raging in Central Europe and signs of a global realignment taking place, it may well seem that the caravan has moved on from our neighborhood, that events in the Middle East are no longer as relevant to what happens elsewhere, that after generations of wars, insurrections, coups and catastrophes, it's another continent turn in the spotlight. That the causes that consumed so much of our energy, ISIS, mass immigration, displacement, and tyranny, have more or less been resolved, or at worst are in holding pattern, which has become more manageable. While I understand the reasons behind such conclusions, I would respectfully but stridently disagree with them. Away from the headlines, the Middle East remains a combustible, unpredictable driver for world events with a proven potential to be a mass global disruptor. Where it be energy security, political turmoil, global warming tipping points, or the ever-present threat of conflict, the region still requires the close attention of everyone, and that's not going to change. Even when we want to, it's never wise to look away from the Middle East for long, or to pretend that its problems have been resolved. Quite simply, they haven't. Foundational issues such as post-World War I borders drawing arbitrarily and indifferent to the will of its people have hindered our region's development. So too have more recent impositions, poverty, inequality, injustice, and corruption, all of which are symptoms of deeply rooted themes which continue to feed instability and terrorism. Outcomes from such flawed beginnings have been difficult to reconcile with the notion of a nation-state. Middle East countries that have succeeded in providing robust economies with thriving societies at peace with their neighbors living behind defensible borders set a rare example. We need not be shy in acknowledging that Iraq isn't one of them. Since the time of Sykes-Picot, and perhaps well before, Iraq has been a tricky place to govern. Mongols and other conquerors, tyrants, kings, and more recent occupiers have all tried. So have elected governments. And they're still trying now in Baghdad, more than 6 months after a national election, where lawmakers are yet to agree on a president, on a prime minister, and the country remains adrift. It's a familiar story for all post-Saddam Iraqi elections. Competing blocs spurred on by foreign parties looking to carve out spheres of influence, which often relegate national concerns to a distant second. We need not hide from reality. Power sharing in Iraq does not come easily. Nor does agreements on anything that challenges narrow vested interests that have little to do with nation building. We in Kurdistan have not often had reasons to believe that Baghdad has our best interests at heart. And the post-Saddam years, every one of the agreements that we've negotiated with our brothers in the federal parliament have required constant monitoring to ensure that our end of bargains were upheld. And in many cases, they haven't been. Every month, we are forced to rely on Baghdad's often lacking goodwill to ensure we are paid our rightful allocation from the federal budget. There has rarely been a month since this deal was negotiated in 2004 that our quota has been paid in full or on time. And there have been many more months where we have not received any payment at all. Earlier this year, a so-called federal court in Baghdad delivered a ruling that challenged our right to develop our oil and gas industry. This ruling was blatantly political. It stemmed from positions we have taken on forming a federal government. We know well the regional issues at play here and who is behind them. And what this says about Iraq's capacity to manage its own internal affairs speaks for itself. The decision-making process in Baghdad is not truly independent. And that sad fact has remained a constant despite nearly 2 decades of attempts at capacity building and building institutions. The federal legislature, as constituted, simply cannot provide fairly and equitably for all those people considered to be Iraqis. While I speak to you as a Kurd, I would like for my voice to carry the weight of all Iraqis, and I hope that it will. We all aspired for a better future in 2003, but the situation we all find ourselves in now cannot go on. We must be brave enough to recognize this and to come up with solutions. I say to my brothers in Anbar, Basra, Mosul, Najaf, Baqouba, and that it is time to do things differently. We all deserve to live at peace with each other, without being beholden to enmity, the tragedies of our past, or our fear for the future. We need means to bring about fresh and sustained trust between us. We need to share power in meaningful ways that better the lot of all. We need to work towards an autonomy that the federal system, which was enshrined after the ousting of Saddam Hussein, has failed to promote. Even those who on paper appear to have benefited from the new Iraq have failed to do so. Basra, for instance, sits on enormous reserves of oil, yet its people remain deprived of the most basic services. It is time for a full and frank conversation about what could come next. I believe that in order for us to live as partners, we need to have more influence over our own affairs and more control over our own destinies. Basra's residents need a stake in their futures. So do those of Fallujah and Ramadi, which have cast off the dark shadow of the ISIS terror group and now want to govern on their own terms just as much as we do. Through the bloodshed of the civil war in the ISIS occupation, both cities were cut off from Iraq, menacing places where few outside the Sunni sects would dare to tread. But once fear subsided and opportunity rose, borders dropped, economies grew, and trust re-emerged. And all it took was hope and glimmer of self-determination. On a micro level, real change is happening. We acknowledge this, and we remain invested in the national political process, which for all its flaws aims to provide a better, more sovereign Iraq for all, regardless of sect or ethnicity. We in the KRG are a robust national partner, fighting hard for the rights of our people, as we should, but at the same time advocating for the betterment of all within our national borders. But what if real progress continues to flatline? What if our collective best endeavors fail to cut through? What if the system in place fails to deliver? At what point do we start to look for a cure? A model that I believe should be discussed in this context is a different structure. I say this after long, careful consideration as someone who has observed and indeed been a part of regional and federal decision-making for at least the past 2 decades. As someone who took part in the constitutional drafting process, I was invested in how to transform Iraq from the terror of tyranny to a country for all, under one banner. Many good people were committed to the efforts we made. I can see that many are here today. There is no shame. And while their good faith attempts are recognized, there is no shame in saying that our work has largely been in vain. I say this as someone who has spoken to our brothers and sisters and the rest of the country, Sunnis, Shias, Christians, Shabak, Turkoman, Yazidis, and other groups, all of whom at some point have spoken about the stagnation and distrust that held us back. In Iraq, 2022, trust between ethnic groups remain, shall we say, a work in progress. And it is hard to envisage how we make that quantum leap from hope to reality without empowering different communities in tangible and meaningful ways. I would like to assure all in this room that advocating that the model I am canvassing here does not mean stripping all power from Baghdad, and nor does it mean breaking down national borders. Rather, I believe that credibly decentralizing decision-making deserves serious thought. My belief is that aiding self-determination in the manner that I envisage could truly be nation-building. We must be brave enough to discuss what sort of a nation would work as a model for the peoples of Iraq. Thriving communities living under their own banners, and those of a state that can truly believe in would be a big leap from where we are now, beholden to forces intent on dividing us to their own ends and stuck in an endless loop of inertia. Institutions that were supposed to serve people have instead become fiefdom that hinder progress and devalue notions of true citizenship. Iraq, as currently governed, is unable to fairly provide for its people and barely able to fend for itself. The model I envisage doesn't mean division. It is subtle devolution of power that sponsors trust and sustained coexistence. There are models of confederation elsewhere in the world that have created thriving, self-contained communities who are also proud to unite behind a single banner. I spoke earlier of Fallujah and Ramadi. Mosul and Baghdad have their own stories to tell. In both cities, enterprise has risen from the rubble, yet the huge potential of both is yet to be fully unlocked, and that won't change until its people are fully empowered. Given the problems I have described, Erbil and Baghdad need to think about new arrangements. With its long history of centralism, Baghdad never fully embraced that the existing constitution makes the KRG the ultimate authority within Kurdistan on most matters, including security, taxation, and natural resources. Iraq's new constitution is described as federal, but in fact already has many elements of confederation. Let us move to make it explicit. Instead of conflict in which one entity tries to coerce the other, let's become equal partners. Join common institutions to address the many issues of common concerns, from trade to environment to security. Let us move toward a model that stops our partners in the West from having to pick a side. I know that there is opposition to even mentioning this idea. I realize that some in the region may fear the potential for knock-on effects into their countries if we embarked on such a journey. But the time to debate and approach has come, as has the time to speak honestly without fear or favor. I again want to reiterate that the issues I'm canvassing here pose no threat to national borders. They are simply an overdue recognition of what goes on between them and how best to change that. I'm confident that informed discussions and debate will lead many to similar conclusions. Let us no longer be shy in admitting that we need the courage to confront our flaws. A new configuration can be a starting point for a dialogue between communities, one whose starting point comes from a position of strength among parties. Mutual respect can quickly build from such a dynamic. It rarely does, however, when one party needs to constantly seek favors and patronage from the other. Cooperation on the right footing would feed trade and stabilization. The latter is in the interest of all of us, not just those who call ourselves the peoples of Iraq, but the broader region as well. This model reconfigures how power is proportioned from the center to the regions. It doesn't diminish the state. In fact, it does the opposite, creating possibilities for long-term viability where it is in short supply today. Ladies and gentlemen, I realize that some of you may be surprised by what you have heard here today. I also know that others of you won't be. For many of you, this is as personal as it is for me. In this room and watching online, some of the world's preeminent observers of Iraq and the Middle East who have had a bird's eye view on the never-ending chaos that has held our region back. Our peoples in all of Iraq deserve a chance for dignified self-determination. In this place, a forum of consequential ideas, I take great satisfaction in starting what I hope will be a fruitful debate that will energize policymakers and thinkers inside this room and elsewhere. My sincere thanks to you all, and may the conversation continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. You said at the end that some people might be surprised by what they've heard, and I think what we should do is take this opportunity to have a bit of a conversation, a couple of questions from me, but also very much given what an expert audience we have with us today, and I want to recognize the Iraq initiative at Chatham House, which has been undergoing now for many years, and which gives us the capacity to really be able to dig deeply into the future of the country. You yourself said that it is not challenging the concept of Iraq that this conversation is about. It's really about how it's structured and how it's convened, and clearly the failure, the latest failure to develop a government after the elections of last October are just the latest indication of, let's use a word maybe used, the dysfunctionality of the current system. There are a lot of other things we might want to touch on as well, from energy and all the things that you were discussing yesterday, I'm sure, with the Prime Minister during your visit here to the UK yesterday. Today I think you're with us tomorrow as well. But maybe I could just ask one straight up question. I was listening very carefully to your words. We had a chance to meet at the Munich Security Conference back in February, literally just before the Russian invasion of Iraq. And we did talk a little bit about the 2017 referendum. I didn't hear that kind of a conversation in the comments you made just now, but you talked about needing a different structure. And I suppose the most obvious question I need to ask you is, what is that different structure? Because I was hearing what isn't working, but I wasn't, and maybe this will be a dialogue. You were very careful about defining the boundaries of what that different structure would be, and you mentioned there are other countries that have experimented. Could you share with us just one or two ideas of what you would be putting on the table that would be different going forward? And I'm sure that'll give an opportunity for others to come up with questions. But let me throw that to you as an opening question. Easy one.
Thank you. Well, if the system in Iraq has worked until now, we wouldn't be talking about this after 100 years. So it means that 100 years of trying different methods and structures haven't produced the results that the Iraqi people deserve to have. You were talking about a referendum. I'm not going to go into details about that, but let me just take a step back and talk about when we drafted the Constitution. The Constitution was a package of compromises that all communities agreed to have, and we basically voted for and was ratified by a huge number of voters in the country. But was it implemented? It wasn't. And one of the reasons that why Iraq is still suffering from so many problems is because the Constitution wasn't fully respected and implemented. And why is that? Because there is no such a mechanism to basically force the governments to implement all the articles in the Constitution that are important to different communities. I can speak for ourselves, for instance, in Kurdistan. Disputed territories. I mean, was one of the main points in the Constitution that was neglected and abandoned and was never implemented. The budget, the hydrocarbon law. There are many issues that are important to all of Iraqis, not just us, but to the Sunnis, to the Shias, was never implemented. So if a system doesn't work, then we have to find ways. And the reason why I wasn't very specific in telling which structure would work best. It has to be a structure that all of us agree on. And that's why we are inviting all of the Iraqis, the Shias, the Sunnis, the Kurds, to come around the table. We have so many similarities. I would say that we have more similarities than differences. Why shouldn't we build on our similarities and agree on how to solve the differences? One of the structures that comes to my mind is basically confederation, which gives more guarantees to different communities. One of the reasons why we have so many problems, why the Sunnis are reacting the way they are, why the Kurds are reacting the way they are, and why the Shias are acting the way they are, because they don't trust each other. Because there is no enough guarantees for the future of any of these communities to feel that the future is secure for them and for their children and the next generations. We have to have a structure in place, regardless of who is in power, regardless of who is the Prime Minister, who is a good or bad person. The system itself doesn't allow the mistreatment of the other communities. Many times it's the communities reacting to the actions of the other based on the lack of trust. So we need to build that trust, and that because it doesn't come easy. It doesn't come based on words and promises. It has to be a system in place that guarantees the trust we all need.
So really it's about you put the word confederation on the table, different from a federation, and there have been examples of confederations that have succeeded and failed, including in Europe over time. So it's really about, but can you get to that before the outcome of the election is fully resolved in terms of new parties? In other words, does this then become a pre-step, or are you waiting for the resolution of that before you can take this forward?
If you listen carefully, I had many ifs.
Yes, I was.
If the system doesn't work, if we couldn't break through, if we couldn't solve our problems, then for how much longer do we have to wait until we finally find a solution that can work? And these are many ifs. Of course, I mean, we are still trying to make things work in the current system. But if it doesn't work, then I think the Iraqi people deserve to have a fresh start, to have to be able to discuss ways. At the end, I think the interest of people should come on top of the interest of the political gains of political parties.
Maybe just ask one more question, and then please be ready with your questions and your comments, because we'd love to hear them. Well, I think I know the answer to the question, so I won't ask it all in that way, but within the Kurdistan region of Iraq, the two main political parties are not completely agreed, at least certainly on the potential makeup of the new government. How united is the Kurdistan region of Iraq on seeking a way forward, even along the lines that maybe you talked about the Confederation?
Well, you know, we are different parties, so we're entitled to have different views, as you are here in the UK. I don't think that all the political parties are united on every single subject and issue. So we do have different views on certain subjects, but when it comes to the national interests of our people and of our country, I can tell you that most of us have similar views, even if they're not completely exact, but they're very similar. So I can tell you that we are united when it comes to defending our national interests.
Right.
But when it comes to, of course, political games and like we had in this election, of course we have different views. And that's very normal, and I think it's healthy. I mean, this is the democracy you introduced to us, and we are learning from it.
Don't learn too much, I think. Things are UK. Yeah, please, first lady there, and then exactly. And let's take I'll take one at a time for the moment and see how we're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. It's Dr. Jihan Baban, founder and president of the Iraqi Environment and Health Society UK. Your Excellency, we welcome you here, and my question is that limiting the flow of water from the northern part of Iraq due to building hundreds of dams by Iran, causing a catastrophic impact on the environment and the ecosystem and the biodiversity of the area, causing hundreds of people to migrate, and also impacting the drinking water on over 2 million people. What's the government dealing with that consequences? Thank you, sir.
Well, I can speak on behalf of my government in the Kurdistan region. We have realized the importance of this issue, and we have introduced solutions. Of course, water is a scarce resource that we all need more than anything else to live. And we are very saddened by the fact that many of the rivers flowing into Kurdistan have been diverted, not just by the building of SADs, but the whole flow of rivers have been diverted. And many of the rivers that are actually feeding both lakes of Tabandifan and Dukan, we either have at some point none or very little water that comes in. But we still have some sources of water inside our region. And with the Ministry of Agriculture and Water Resources, we have studied where we can build additional dams, that we can preserve the water that we have, and build water reservoirs that would also benefit agriculture, climate change, tourism, energy, and that would be important also for the rest of Iraq. because you know that the location of building dams, I mean, it's the nature of the region that determines where you can build dams. You're not free to build dams wherever you want. And Kurdistan has that chance, you know, it has that location to build as many dams as we possibly can to reserve water for the rest of the country. I hope that that doesn't, like everything else, is not politicized, and I hope that they're looking at this from a strategic point of view and seeing the importance of building these dams, how important it is, not only for Kurdistan, but for the rest of Iraq. So the solution is really to build more dams inside our own country.
Okay. Yeah, please. Just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Chris Bowers. I used to serve in your wonderful part of the world. Your Excellency, it's lovely, it's wonderful seeing you here. I'm intrigued by your description of the Confederation, and I'm already in my mind sort of sketching, okay, well, you could imagine sort of a sunny Confederation area around Fallujah and so what have you, and also potentially another one around in the deep south with some Shiite areas. But then I guess, and I can imagine decentralisation of power, but then I guess you'd still need a sort of an overarching body, a sort of a federation council or what have you. What would that look like, and how might it be composed in your suggestion? And is there not a risk that it would sort of then look like the current federal structures at the moment, the current federal government? But I also want to say, I applaud your the idea of new solutions to Iraq.
Look, the idea is to really promote true partnership. We need to be equal citizens and have equal rights. One community cannot feel inferior to another one being superior. That equality, creating that balance, is what we need. So you can call it whatever you want. And it doesn't have to be a system that exists somewhere. We cannot duplicate a system that works or fails somewhere else and then apply it to our own community. We have our own differences and we need to take that into account. But the idea is to open that discussion, to have all of our people come on the table, to be brave enough to admit that we have a serious issue of trusting each other. And once we admit and diagnose the problem, it's easy to find solutions if we intend to find solutions. And this is just an idea to put on the table, have all of us come on a round table and look for options. So it's not really one clear-cut solution, say, well, this is it, and you know, you have to accept it. This is my view, you may have a different view, somebody else may have a different view. But the idea is to start that dialogue and talk about it. But the idea, the main goal, is to build trust and to make sure that we all are true partners. Partnership is the key here.
Just quickly, because I listened again very carefully to what you said earlier, the ministries, in many cases, as part of the kind of current ineffective system, are divided up in a way, certainly between communities. Now, you mentioned yourself, the Ministry of Justice is taking certain steps, including on the application of energy resources and the acquisition of them and the spending of them, that seem to have political dimensions to them rather than not. In a new system, I think what I'm hearing you say is, in a way, you'd want to weaken the power of the central ministries in Baghdad. In other words, each region, or whatever the new confederation might set up, would almost have competing capacity to manage its resources or security or education. So is it a question of trying to weaken, let's be frank about it, the central departments and ministries that at the moment are, as you see it, the source of so much ineffectiveness?
Well, it's not the Minister of Justice, it's something so-called the Federal Court. The Federal Court, of course, I mean, I've talked about it before, so I'm not going to go into details and explain in our position on that point. But the point is, we need to really have guarantees for the resources that we have that are going to be in the best use of our people. So, whether we have, we're still trying to work with Baghdad, and like I said, I had many ifs. We are still working with Baghdad, with the ministry, with the government, to find a solution that can work and can satisfy all of us. But if none of this works, then we have to admit that the alternative of not doing anything is far worse than finding a solution that we think can be beneficial to all sides. So in this case, really, it's a voluntary unification. When we're talking about confederation, it's a voluntary unification, but we can come and talk about what we can share and what we can govern at the local level, and these are all subjects to discussion. And what I'm introducing is just the principle idea of let's talk and see if this system doesn't work, then let's look for other options to save the country, to save all of the communities in the country, rather than waiting another 100 years and still fail.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman there at the front with a question.
Yeah, me? Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, William Long, Editor of Digest. I'm sorry, yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask you, Prime Minister, thank you first of all for your thoughts. You mentioned regional influences. You haven't mentioned Iran specifically. I want to ask you whether this confederation concept that you're proposing, whether Iran would see this as something that they simply do not want to allow to happen. So how significant an influence is Iran in your vision? And also I'd like to know what are the current relationships with the KRG and Iran? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Obviously, a peaceful relationship, respectable relationship between states is always admirable and desirable. That's what we want, having peace with all of our neighbors. We are talking about Iraq. We're talking about the system that can best serve the interests of the Iraqi people, not the Iraqi neighbors. So, in a way, considering Iraq's neighbors is irrelevant. Of course, they have their own interests, but that's the key. What are we aiming here? To serve the interests of Iraq's neighbors or Iraqi people? What I'm suggesting is that we have to keep the Iraqi nation's interest at the priority, and that has to come on top. So let's focus on what would be best for the Iraqi people, not the Iraqi neighbors, and then once we sort out our problems, we can always find ways to establish good relations with our neighbors.
Of course, I'll just add on very quickly, with a country that has fired, I think, some missiles over towards you, one can assume that they're not entirely happy with the situation at the moment. But you mentioned that we should be thinking about, or you should be thinking about, the Iraqi people and not the neighbours. But there are people in Iraq who feel that Iran is a guarantor of their interests within Iraq. How does one resolve that particular problem?
Yeah, this is a sensitive issue. Of course, we condemn the attack. We think it was unjustified. They had some very cheap excuses to justify this aggression. It was condemned widely around the world. Of course, they, even if they have concerns about certain issues, there are ways to talk about, with the neighbors. But these accusations and allegations were absolutely baseless. So what they said was a failure to justify their actions, and they just came up with these fake stories. In any case, this is really the core of the debate. This will not be acceptable to Iran, or some Iraqis believe that an external country is a guarantor. For how long are we going to think about what would be, which external force will be our guarantor, and what would be in the best interest of our neighbors? At some point, what I'm suggesting, we have to think about what is best for us. As Iraqis, as Kurds, as Sunnis, as Shias, what is best for us? We seem to care about everybody else, but forget about what is best for us. And that's what I'm suggesting. We need to think about what would be the best solution for the Iraqi people.
Thank you. First lady here, and the gentleman there, gentleman there. Yeah.
Yes,
Which microphone coming?
me.
Yes, hold on a second.
Your Excellency, it's wonderful to hear you talking about needing to bring everybody together. And in your country you have a lot of refugees from Syria and from Iran, and they're Kurds. Can you please explain what is your relationship now with Turkey, which just last weekend was attacking the Mahmud refugee camp? It was attacking all sorts of bases in your country going into northern Iraq. Can you explain, please, how, in a way, you seem to be dividing the Kurds from the autonomous administration of North Syria? Can you please explain what your relationship is with Turkey?
Yeah. Well, Turkey is another neighbor that has its own interests. We have some common interests with them. We have good economic relations with them. We don't necessarily agree with every policy that they have, and they don't agree with us. Regarding the attacks, I must make a correction that the attacks are against PKK bases. PKK is a Turkish organization, Kurds from Turkey, that have left Turkey and have come to our region. Our region, we fought for 100 years to liberate our areas. We have established our government since 1991, since 1992 until now. We have a government, we have a parliament, we have authorities, we have laws. PKK is coming and residing in the areas, especially the border areas, without really respecting our government. They are introducing themselves as authorities, and they are dragging the Turks because they're party opposing the Turkish government. But they're coming into our territories instead of fighting inside Turkey and trying to struggle for their own freedom and their rights. They're coming and occupying an already liberated area. We have shed blood of thousands of our martyrs to liberate our areas. We don't need PKK to come and liberate it from us again. But the reason why they're coming here and the consequences are that the Turks are following them. They're coming and attacking PKK inside our territories. That is obviously causing problems for us. There are many villages, 800 villages, that we haven't been able to reconstruct because the ongoing conflict between PKK and Turkey. Our villagers were unable to go back to their homes and towns and farms because of the ongoing conflict between Turkey and PKK. So the best thing PKK can do to help Kurdistan is to leave the Iraqi Kurdistan and go back and struggle in their own territories, if that's what they really aim to do. Right now, everything they are doing is destroying what we have built after so many years of struggle. So, we never support any sort of conflict or violence to solve any problems. We always propose and suggest that there has to be peaceful dialogues to come to some sort of sustainable solutions. But to be quite honest, the reason that the ongoing conflicts are happening is because of the presence of PKK.
Just following up on that, could you say something quickly about your relationship with the PYD, which of course has not come from Turkey, but it was an ally in fighting against ISIS and so on, to say something about your relationship with the PYD and how you see that playing out with Syria.
Well, the Kurds in Syria, the situation is different. We have a lot of sympathizers, we have lots of good friends inside Syria, and we feel for the Kurds, wherever they may be. In Syria, in Turkey, in Iran, wherever they may be. But we don't intend to interfere in their affairs. They can decide for themselves what system they want, whom they want to negotiate with, and what sort of government they want to have. That's for them. We can only be helpful. We cannot interfere and dictate what they should be doing. Now, PYD, to be frank with you, is very closely associated with PKK. Now, some may disagree, but the reason why many disagree is because they don't want to admit, because PKK is labeled as a terrorist organization in Europe and in the United States. PYD, YPG are very closely associated with them, and they don't really admit that there is this link so that the ongoing support for PYD shall continue. But at the same time, we are hoping that we have been very supportive of the intra-Kurdish dialogue between PYD and its the circle around it, and then other political parties that are outside and are somehow rivals. But we are encouraging a very constructive dialogue to talk about how they can shape the future of the region, and they cannot be the only force because they have this armed wing of YPG fighting ISIS. They shouldn't be able to oppress other political parties and to kidnap and assassinate other political activists because they don't share the same views with them. So the best, what we are doing is just extending the hand of help to make sure that there will be a more peaceful solution between the Kurds inside Syria, but we don't see PYD as the only representative of the Kurds.
Thank you very much. Where are you there? Please, first man. Keep your hand up for a second. Yeah, I can see you. Yeah, that's good.
Prime Minister, Christoph Michels from the Iraq-Britain Business Council. May I first welcome your comments on Iraqi unity and thank you for your support over the years in Kurdistan. The business environment in Kurdistan and in Iraq as a whole has not improved in recent years. And the pool of Western companies interested in coming into Iraq but also into Kurdistan is diminishing simply by attrition. And still you're expecting more companies to come. So what are you going to do about it? What is your government planning to do to improve the business environment in Kurdistan and possibly in Iraq?
Well, thank you for the question. Please allow me to disagree with you. We have to look at the broader situation. Of course, we were hit with COVID. Our budget was not paid by the federal government. We continue to struggle to get our fair budget on a monthly basis. At some point, the oil prices dropped. Now it's gone back up. We had, so many security challenges and so many, other economic crises, inflation, not just in Kurdistan, but in the rest of Iraq. But despite all that, I'll just give you an example. When I took office, almost 3 years ago, we, at the very beginning, we started a very aggressive reform on administrative reform and financial reform. And it went very, very well. And then COVID hit us, and then the prices dropped, and then our budget was cut. So basically with no revenues, the whole economy collapsed. With no budget whatsoever, we still managed to survive and still pay our salaries and still trying to work with the private sector. We managed to build projects. So it was the environment that actually kind of put that pressure on us to not move as fast as we wanted. But in comparison to the rest of the region, we did very well. If you look at the data, if you look at the situation, you can see that we have done things that would have been impossible if we hadn't done the reforms that we did at that time. We also amended the investment law for the local and the foreign investments. We are digitalizing our government, trying to cut the red tape and to cut the time for registration of the companies and also the cost for registering companies. We have invited many of the private sectors to build huge projects like agri-industry, for instance. So, and also construction in Kurdistan is not growing, and if you look at our economy, it's actually on the upper, line. It's going up. It's increasing. It's not. I don't know. I mean, based on what data you say that the economy in Kurdistan is not doing well. I mean, it's not doing as well as we want. But in comparison, if you put it in the larger context, if you look at the entire region, we are doing much better than the rest of Iraq and the neighboring countries. Still, we are not very happy with where we are, and we are very ambitious. We want to move forward, but of course, we also have to have the support of, the political support, the security support, because all of that can affect the view of the minds of businessmen. They want to come to a place where they want to have a secure future for the return of their investments. But I am very optimistic. I think we're doing well, and we have taken steps that hopefully by the end of the year we will see the results of it that will be more encouraging.
Let me bring in two more questions here. I'm keeping an eye on a bit on time. So you first, please. Is the microphone coming? Just so we can hear. Go ahead.
Louis Trushi, founder of British Friends of Kurdistan and Chief Executive of the NHS. I just want to build on your success. So you've led an ambitious and innovative program of reform. It's been quite successful. Well done, thank you. Really what I want to add is, so you've got a talent for unlocking the hemorrhage in the system, going back to the confederation system. What are your bargaining chips and what is your contingency to be able to put an effective system in place?
What bargaining chips do you have? Just hold on, let me just take one other question here.
Yeah, Mr. President, thank you very much for the
Wait,
opportunity.
microphone's coming. Hold on a second.
Despite of all the challenges and crises which we are facing, we've seen too many progressions in different sectors in the region. The education sector is one of them. We have some high-quality universities, the American University in Tubuk and Suleimania UK to contribute. Is there a plan to host the UK universities to rebuild the infrastructure of education in the KRG?
Let me answer that first. Yes, yesterday we had a very good meeting with the Minister of Education. We have discussed ways of how we can best cooperate with each other in terms of the quality of teachers, quality of education, and also there has been steps on establishing a British university in Kurdistan. So there are efforts on the way. We welcome any support that we can get from the United Kingdom. To answer your question, the bargaining chip is bringing stability, introducing peace. What we are saying is that you have tried a system that has, not a system, many systems that have failed for over 100 years. And I think it's Einstein said that it's insanity to try the same mistake and expect different results. So you will never get a better result from what you have. What we are saying is that let's still work together, let's build trust, let's bring peace. What our strongest bargaining chip is the results that we have achieved in Kurdistan. I said it in my speech. Basra is one of the richest cities maybe in the world, sitting on a sea of oil reserve. Look at Basra, look at Erbil. With 5% of their resources, how did we manage to build Kurdistan in such a way, with all the challenges we faced, and with all the obstacles and all these pressures that we are under? So if we can do this, we believe that with 95% of Iraq's wealth, Iraq can do much better. But the problem is not the wealth. The problem is not natural resources. The problem is not human resources. The problem is management, is the system. What we are introducing is a system that can work and can turn Iraq into a different place where all of Iraq's people can benefit from and can have a much better life.
We're coming close to the end. I want to make sure I get one particular question in, so let me ask it myself in case it doesn't come up. Obviously, you were here, you met yesterday with Prime Minister Johnson, you met, I think, also with Kwasi Kwarteng, Secretary of State for Business and Energy and Industrial Policy. I'm wondering if you could say a word or two about the oil environment, the gas environment, the shortages which are turning up in Europe, including in the UK as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What opportunities are there for the Kurdistan region of Iraq? You've now exporting, I think, from pretty much nothing to 500,000 barrels a day, producing close to 500 million cubic feet per day. Is this an opportunity? What are the obstacles? You've got to get it out in a particular direction. The relationship with Turkey becomes very important. Markets elsewhere, but obviously the relationship with Baghdad, as you said earlier, important as well. But could you say a word or two about, is this a new opportunity or not? Is it going to be very difficult to execute it?
Well, last time I think I was in Dubai when I gave a speech and I said roughly 500,000 barrels and then everybody counted 500,000 barrels. Let me be more specific. 420,000 barrels are exported. It's not happening. But the idea is, yes, there is potential to export more. There is potential to develop more gas. We are talking about two questions. One is political, one is about economy and simply technical. Do we have the economic capabilities and technical capabilities to increase and produce more gas and oil? Absolutely, we do. Is it in the best interest of Kurdistan's people, Iraq's people, the world? Absolutely. Then what is stopping you from doing that? It's a political question. And that is we have to address, and this is what we have to really find a solution for. We are talking to Baghdad. We are trying to explain to Baghdad, this is a natural resource that we can benefit from. Of course, all natural resources someday will come to an end. We need to make the best of it while we can, and then turn all of these resources into something that can sustain and can continue to help grow our economy. Invested in different sectors of the economy. For instance, in agriculture, it's a never-ending asset that we can have. So this is where we are. We are introducing and telling the capabilities of Kurdistan. This is what we can. And we never said that you're going to be an alternative to any other providers of energy in the world. We don't want to make anybody sensitive and feel that, okay, now we're going to take their place. That's not our aim. This is not our goal. But we are saying that now the world is going through a crisis, and this crisis could continue and could be repeated at different times. Does Kurdistan have the potential to fill some of the gap? Absolutely it does. So that's what we are offering. We're saying that here we are, we can be helpful. Let us help each other. This is what we say, and of course, I mean, it's an idea, it's welcomed by all of our friends, and we think that Kurdistan can play an important role.
See, if the British government has some influence in Baghdad, it might make a difference as well. I think, so I'll take one last question, because we're literally 1 minute before, and then the last question to wrap up. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much. Noel Khatib, former Federal Minister from Baghdad. My question is about political deals versus constitutional legal resolve. Throughout my career, previous my short-lived appointment in government, until now, I noticed that Kurdistan focused more on trying to reach a political deal with Baghdad, as opposed to reaching a long-term resolve on constitutional legal to find, for example, a solution on hydrocarbon law, revenue sharing law. These things, I mean, it provides much more security as opposed to kind of like short-term deals that secures initial payments from on federal budgets and so on, and then stops after a few months at the beginning of each government. So don't you think it's about time that when Kurdistan delegation goes to Baghdad, seriously talk about with the various players, let's reach a deal on hydrocarbon law and revenue sharing law, and let's put an end to all these short-lived political deals?
Well, thank you for this question. I think the question is exactly the opposite. We are the ones insisting on constitutional solutions, and Baghdad is that insisting on political solutions. This is our problem. We are telling them that we have a constitution. The constitution calls for a hydrocarbon law. Does Iraq have a hydrocarbon law? No. Why not? In 2007, we tried, and there was a draft for the hydrocarbon law. It was the federal government that didn't pass it through the parliament. It wasn't us. We still insist on having that hydrocarbon law to be the law in place. Iraq doesn't have a law. Let me be clear. They still refer to 1976 law under the Saddam regime's government, which was the central government. So even the court ruling is relying on that law because it doesn't have a law. After the Constitution, there was supposed to be a hydrocarbon law. After the Constitution, there was supposed to be a federal court. Neither the federal court was established, nor the hydrocarbon law was established. So this is exactly our argument. I hope that, the question, I wish that you just changed it.
The subject.
Exactly. It's Baghdad.
It's an argumentative.
Well, honestly, well, these are the facts. These are the facts. We are calling for the higher travel law. We are calling for a constitutional solution, and we insist on our constitutional law.
You said that Chatham House is a place for dialogue. Actually, I thought through that question, there was a point of agreement. It was just a matter of who was proposing it. And you both agreed on what you were trying to propose. So that's a good sign. I will pocket that sign of optimism, which is a rare thing these days. And thank you very much, Prime Minister. Again, on behalf of Chatham House, Renard Mansour, who leads our Iraq initiative, all of us here who believe so fervently, like you, in the importance of this country, its strategic importance, both for the region, globally as well, and are pained by the very difficult times it continues to go through. So anything we could all do, and I know many of us who are supporters and colleagues on this project as well, we're delighted you would come and join us this morning. Thank you very much. Please stay in your seats if you can. Warm thanks for Prime Minister. Thank you very much.